I grew up in the slums of Shreveport, Louisiana, too uncomfortable. So I went into the Air Force. I wanted to be the President of the United States. That was the beginning, fight or flight. There's a science to living.
Your human factor profile.
Knowledge is power.
I'm an energy person.
Think about how we could eliminate the violence in schools right now.
So I want to thank you, everybody out there, for coming back for another episode of You Go First. I'm your host, Lain Hensley, and I am crazy excited today to have a special guest coming at you with a ton of knowledge, some amazing life experience, and has just been a real mentor of mine and somebody that I've watched work with groups over the last 16 years or so. So a good friend and mentor, and like I said, somebody who has inspired absolutely an entire generation of young people through his work as a professor, through young people with his work with Rotary and the Camp Royal or Rotaract experience. And so with that, I want to just start out by just sending it out there, a big welcome, and people in studio, you can clap if you want, for Dr. Robii Dotson here with us today. Absolutely. Yeah. So Robii, so the theme is You Go First. And the idea is that we're trying to give people information, inspiration, perspective on how they can go first in their lives to make change happen. Where can they go first if they have the tools or inspiration to go first and the courage to do that? And just a little info about Dr. Robii Dotson. He is, of course, he has his PhD in psychology, BS in business management, MA in correctional psychology, as an AA in political science and history. You've worked in Hollywood, helping develop movies. You had a radio show, one of the first black radio show hosts as a psychologist. University-wise, you've been at Stanford University, University of Hawaii, Hawaii Pacific University, U.S. Air Force Academy. I mean, the list is just on and on and on. I know you've given over 700 keynote speeches around the world. And so just so thankful to be a friend of yours and to have your guidance from me, and happy to share you with our audience today. So knowing all those credentials that you have, and I know you have a lot coming up with how you're going to use your experience and your knowledge to help impacting the world. But let's start with, tell us a little about Robii. Where were you born? What was life like as a kid? And how did you get from wherever you started to working for two presidents and, managing $1 billion plus budget at the Pentagon? So where did it start? And let's talk about that first.
Well, I'm pretty... How do you say I'm in a situation where I'm humbled and honored that anyone would just care about who I am and how I came to be. For some reason, I was a kid who was the oddball in the sense that I would spend a lot of time thinking about what I wanted to be in the future. And I grew up in the slums of Shreveport, Louisiana, where it was a very, very dismal time. I was born in 1946, right after the war. And so living in Louisiana for my family wasn't easy. I remember that experience. But I knew it was a place that I didn't want to be. It was too uncomfortable. I didn't feel good enough. I didn't feel that I had the opportunities. My mother was working 3 jobs. She'd get up in the morning and go pick cotton. She'd come back in the 6 or 7 in the morning. She's out picking cotton from 3 o'clock or so forth. They ride a bus out, and then they ride a bus back. And somehow she would go to a delicatessen, and blacks couldn't go in the front of the delicatessen. She'd have to buy food out of the back. So she would buy the ham bones and different things that are left over from the restaurant. And she'd come home, and she would make the breakfast. And we'd wake up to the smell of biscuits. And, even though we lived in the slums, my mother created a middle-class environment inside of our home. So we didn't know that we were poor. We didn't understand the circumstances with which she had to deal. And she would wake up, we put on nice clothes, pressed and ironed, have breakfast just like a regular family. And then we'd go off to school. Once she'd go off to school, she'd do whatever she had to do around the house, and then she would work in the grocery store. And she would bag groceries, and she'd ride a bike to deliver it to the white families that needed it, and so forth. And we'd go to school. She insisted that we do well in school. She taught my brother and I to read at the age of 3. And she felt that it was necessary because when you're educated, that eliminates ignorance. And it also helps to eliminate the control people have over you because you don't know. So as a result of that, she pushed education. So we came home from school, we were latchkey. She would come home, make lunch for us, go through our homework, and then she'd go back to work until about 6 or 7. Wow. Come home, she would make a nice meal, check our homework, we bathe and whatnot, do a little bit more homework, we read the scriptures and whatnot. And after she put us to bed, then she would take in other people's ironing. She would iron clothes and whatnot at night. So that was her routine. And in addition to that, she was a domestic. And she and my grandmother would work in a home for a family. They were Italian. And when the father died, the mother died shortly thereafter, and there were 4 kids. And they took those kids in. I mean, they paid the mortgage on the home, looked after those kids. So we grew up with a white family. Plus, my family is mixed as well. So we'd have to ride the bus to the neighborhood black school, which may be 4 or 5 miles away, and the kids could walk up the street to school, but we'd all meet at home. So I grew up without prejudice and without feeling inadequate outside. But I always wanted to excel. I wanted more education for myself. And my secret dream that I could never talk to anybody about is I wanted to be the president of the United States. But that's something you couldn't talk about in the community because people would laugh at you. You're never going to go to college. No one's ever done that. So having that kind of a background, I kept that internal to myself. But I did well in school. I graduated number 7 in my class of 271 kids. So I was pretty bright. And as a result of that, it was a platform for me to continue my education. Thinking that I was going to get a scholarship to college, I only had $30. But I felt like I had a great mind, so I qualified for Southern University. So I was going to get a scholarship, but some kid with the same name got the scholarship. Oh. So we're sitting around waiting for this letter in the mail of acceptance. It never came. Yeah. So I went into the Air Force. And the Air Force was probably one of the best decisions I could have made because it got me in a place where I could fulfill my dreams and I could be someone. And after I'd been in the military for 8 months, the letter came that I had received a scholarship. So naturally I said, I'm happy. So I just let the people know in the Air Force that, hey, I'm going back to college.
They're probably like, sorry, buddy.
Yeah.
So what? I mean, we could do a whole show on honestly what you've said already as far as your life growing up and how your mom set that example and just the belief you had about yourself, like I have a good brain and finding your way in this place. So what happened now and when did psychology start to become such a passion for you and understanding?
Well, after I had been in for a little while, I wanted to go to college. After I got through basic training, I wanted to go to college. So I was stationed in the Philippines. And I was sitting down, shining my shoes in the latrine. And I happened to see a Reader's Digest magazine that was laying there. And it was the title of the article of the cadet that wouldn't quit. And I opened it, and it was about Lieutenant General Benjamin O. Davis Jr., and he was the first black general in the Air Force, and he had gone through the Air Force Academy, and while he was there, his white classmates wouldn't speak to him. In other words, he was silenced for 4 years, but he graduated in the top of his class. His father, though, was Benjamin O. Davis Sr., and he was a brigadier. No, he was a major general in the Army. And at the time I read this article, Lieutenant General, that's a 3-star. So the ranks are like this: Brigadier, 1-star, Major General, 2-star, Lieutenant General, 3-star, and then full general was 4 stars. So I was so impressed with the fact that he went to the Air Force Academy and he was silenced for 4 years. I wanted to become an officer. That was my number one goal. My second goal was to get a PhD, and my third goal was to become president of the United States. So anyway, that was the beginning. And shucks, I flew in a helicopter in Vietnam. I would take my correspondence courses. We flying over the jungle, rescuing down pilots or crews or whatever, and I'd be studying my materials, my classroom materials, right on the aircraft. So
was this in Vietnam or was this in
Vietnam?
Wow.
Guam, all over the Philippines, all over the what we call the Southeast Asia theater. So Tanzania, Thailand.
Wow.
I can't remember all the places in Thailand, Cambodia, and so forth. But that was the beginning of the education, because education had been instilled in me. It's very important. So my very first degree, AA degree, got at Yuba College in Marysville, California.
Wow.
I was stationed at Beale Air Force Base, and then I went on to get a master's degree and so forth and so on. And one thing that's unique, though, my master's thesis was from Chapman College, is where I went to school there. My master's thesis was used as part of the California penal system. It had to do with recidivism. My professor had asked us to write a paper, and I happened to write a paper that he thought was great. And then they ended up, I think Ray Pecunier was I believe he was over the penal system in California. And this professor, I can't remember his name now, worked in the system somehow, and he sent this up, and there was a little paragraph there.
Yeah,
the California penal system. So that was the beginning of knowing that I could do more than...
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you had obviously some really big dreams as a kid growing up in that situation. Somehow that was instilled in you as, in the spirit of you go first, your mom was going first to show you a world beyond your current circumstance. And then as this path starts to unfold, so you're getting these degrees, you're starting to discover that you have this impact. And then let's fast forward a little to like, okay, now you've become a psychologist, you're working in lots of different areas and using your psychology. And my experience mostly with you is in your profile, your human factor profile. And I know there's lots of assessments that people use out there from, Myers-Briggs and all the others. But in my experience in the last, like I said, 16 years of seeing you deliver this process, most of our listeners are either business professionals or college students, or they're just in significant relationships, or they're young people just trying to figure out what to do with their lives. Tell us a little about the human factor profile, like what inspired you to create this tool as briefly as you can, and then give them a little window into what it is and how it can apply to them. Obviously, this won't be even close to enough time to go into those depths, but as you were a psychologist, then how do you convert into then creating this human factor tool, and what does it mean as they try to use it?
Well, I think I'm very pleased that you asked me that question, but I want to go back for just a second. That when I was a kid, there were a couple of things that made me think and act out of the box, and one was my mother would say, "You're so dumb you don't know you can't do it." That was number one. And number two is, she says, "I might give out, but I'll never give up." So that let me know that anything's possible. Yeah. And the fact that my circumstances didn't determine what I could be or what she could be. So fast forward to the psychology thing. when I was very early in my academic career, I didn't know that I had any skills. I knew I had some, but there's no way to pinpoint them. But it just so happens I took the CLEP test. And the CLEP test is a college level program where you can challenge. So my first 3 years of college, I just challenged the test. And I passed the courses. I didn't know that I'd had this innate ability to understand psychological principles. Mm-hmm. So the whole first 3 years is just I just challenged it. And I did well on all the CLEP tests. So in so doing, I discovered a lot more about myself. And in 1981, I started to write about this. By this time, I had 2 master's degrees. And I knew that people were different. I read about Myers-Briggs. I read about some of the other typing theories. I went all the way back to Hippocrates and 400 BC, looking at the people types, human types, all of these kinds of things. And somehow I felt there was something missing. Those were grandiose ideas. These are things that you could hear about and think about, but how do you actually apply this to your regular everyday life? So I wrote a book. My doctoral thesis was called Contact Therapy. And what it basically did was it indicated that if you couldn't afford therapy, you couldn't afford to have your own psychologist, who do you turn to help you overcome situations in your life? And it turns out the Boy Scout leader, the bartender, the mother, the pastor, a good friend, all of those people had information that could be helpful. So that was the beginning. I developed this. The book sold for a time. One of my sons, who's happened to be a professor at Harvard right now, he says, "Dad, I was in England, and your book's on sale in England." And it's been out of print since 1987, so that made me feel pretty good.
Yeah.
But then in 1985, I had the concept of how to create the perfect world. How do you take the typing theories that are out there that demonstrate the individual differences between people, and then start to, I have these thoughts that come to you in the morning and so forth, and they just kept coming and kept coming. So I decided there has to be some scientific principles on which people are different. And I came up with this theory called psychology is the science of living. There's a science to living. Mm-hmm. And in the science of living, there are things that indicate that we're individually different. We think differently. We process information differently. We have different motivations. We have different reactions to stress. And then there's the reality principle, and then there's the perceived reality principle. So I needed to put all that together in such a way that I could build some kind of a program that was based on experience that a person could do right now. For example, a Myers-Briggs is 350 questions. You take the assessment. It's someone sends it out and it processes for 3 weeks. They come back and they give you a picture of yourself. For instance, you'll have a Myers-Briggs type indicator, which is a Myers-Briggs MBTI. And so you'll find out that you're an introvert, you have your judgment, or something like that. But anyway, you'll have this type code, and then after 2 weeks, you forget it. But it wasn't anything, you know something about yourself, but there's no way to apply it. So I wanted to go a step beyond.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get into how people think, what motivates them, what brings them self-esteem, what causes them stress and frustration, and then also what makes another person attracted to another. So that was the beginning. And then I guess that it just evolved after that. So now it's called the human factor, and I'll talk more about that if you want.
Yeah, I would love that. I mean, and
Sure.
And even in the fast session that we do, that I've seen you do many times, is 3 to 4 hours long. Mm-hmm. You know, the podcast is obviously, you know, a half hour or
sure.
so. So, you know, if we can jump into, you know, so you obviously, you know, find this sort of gap in the thought process from these tools, and using sure. your own innate abilities to really assess human behavior, come up with these four human factor types. And for sure. me, you know, I know that there's knowledge, you know, there's structure, there's energy, and compassion. Those are the four.
Yes.
And, you know, when I've seen it before, I've had the luxury of, like, my kids have gone through it with you. My mother was there one time. My father was there one time to see your session. And, you know, these awakenings of, like, oh my gosh, that's why.
Sure.
And maybe tell us just a little about sure. each of the types. Sure. Like I said, I hope this is just the beginning of a conversation we can have in future podcasts.
Our personality has 4 levels, mm-hmm. in my opinion. And see, those 4 levels indicate something about us. See, there is no one specific type. We have what we call a profile code. For example, when you buy a product at a store, there's a little code, a little barcode that tells you all about that. It tells you where to find it. It tells you when it's going to run out, when it's going to be resupplied. So it's a barcode. So we actually are born with a barcode. I call it the code of life. Everyone refers to it as the DNA. So our personalities are broken up into parts. For example, my particular innate core value, or my human factor profile code, would be knowledge, structure, energy, and compassion. Now, what does that mean? That top card, or that top level, which would be knowledge, that's my innate core value or factor. What that means is that I am a knowledge seeker. Logic drives me, looking at the big picture, seeking knowledge. So in that, it gives me a power, a gift, and a mission in life. That person would be a person who's driven by the inquiry, the person who's driven for seeking knowledge, looking at a way to control nature for the benefit of man, developing technologies or concepts. That person's power would be the power of their intelligence or imagination. And their natural gift in life is to advance mankind. Mm-hmm. So that person is easily recognizable because they're the ones, quote unquote, we look at and call geeks. So that's my upper level. My second level is my parental innate core value, which would be structure. That means that the person or persons in my life during my formative years taught me my value system. They created the factors that drive that part of me. So when I say that my innate, my human factor profile code is knowledge, structure, energy, and compassion, what I'm saying is that upper level is innate. That's unlearned. I had nothing to do with that. Yeah. The second one was taught or shaped to me by parents or whoever had that parental
so it's this
role.
Mom with the iron shirts and the breakfast is ready and go into you're like, okay, structure is important. I'm sure she held you to a high standard.
And the energy, that's my social core value. That is the environment, that's the neighborhood, that's the tradition. Mm-hmm. Those are the things that I learned from my friends, my neighborhood, my school. And the last one, which would be compassion, that's the stress in my life. Okay, so what that means is that in life, those upper levels, or you're born with or taught skill sets, and they're highly developed at the top level. And as you move down, social core level, and then when you get to your bottom level, in my particular case would be compassion, that means I'm stressed in that area when I deal with people or situations that are that have to do with caring and nurturing or patience and things of that sort. So it stresses me, but that means that I need to work on that area. You know, when a person lives to be 60, 70 years old, they learn not to let things bother them. Okay?
Yeah.
But do you want to wait till you're 70 years old to figure that out, or do you want to know now? So by understanding what your stress is, and you can build that up. You can have more experiences, help you develop that. So in my particular case, in everybody's case, when you experience stress, you have one or two responses: fight or flight. If your structure or energy, you tend to fight to try to manage that stress. Mm-hmm. If you're compassion or your knowledge, where you take flight, you remove yourself from that. So it gives you a little bit of understanding of what they are. Energy, people are the kind that know fear. They're instinctively motivated by action, activity. They're spontaneous, loving, sexual. They love extreme sports. A compassion person, that's a person who's more social, caring, nurturing, the kind of people who's your best friend. They're motivated by feelings. They're knowing what's naturally important to people. And then, of course, the structured person is a task-oriented person who is performance-driven. They have a task list for everything. They're step by step.
Yeah.
And each one of those things, that's what's important about understanding the difference. An energy person is what you call an application learner. That means that anything they learn, they can learn in 20 minutes. They have to be able to apply it right away. They don't need extensive background. They don't read the whole book, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. A person who has knowledge, on the other hand, that person's what you call a discovery learner. Don't give me the answer, give me the question, let me find my own answer, because they can think it out, they can solve it, they can use the theory. A structured person, on the other hand, is what you call a direction learner. They naturally understand things when you explain it to them. You go step by step. You present it to them in an organized manner. And a compassion person is what you call a discussion learner. They have to talk it out. It has to be a shared experience where there's a dialogue between the person providing information to them and the person receiving it. So they work together. So does that give you some basic understanding of the differences?
Yeah, I mean, and it really for our listeners, because I know that, this is the hard part. Like for me, I'm a compassion person. That's my first. My wife is a knowledge person. So we're good friends, but you're knowledge, I'm compassion. And last for me is knowledge. Yeah. And that's my stress. I never feel like I know enough. I haven't read enough books. I don't have enough information. And my wife she wants the question and she wants to find her own answer. So, for people out there, like I think one thing I love about your tools is so simple for people to really get a sense of, wow, when they read through the information, it's pretty obvious, I think, for me at least, to say, okay, cool, I'm compassion first, I'm energy, I'm structure, and then I'm knowledge. And then looking at the influences of my life where the stress is. How do we then, if we want to make this perfect world in our relationships and our understanding, so we can go first to have a deeper understanding of the people who stress us out and why it's like, oh, well, that's why, because they're just a knowledge person and I'm an energy person. I'm ready to go. And they're like, wait a second, well, where are we going? And what's the details? Because their structure might be number two for them. Yeah. So what can you tell us about, how do we learn more about, how to understand those people that are different than us, knowing those types?
That's a very good question. I want to talk to you about that. Let me just give you a little joke here. The compassion person says to the energy person, or let's say the compassion husband says to the knowledge wife, honey, you don't say you love me anymore. And the knowledge person, the knowledge husband says, I told you I love you 15 years ago. Do I need to repeat myself? Right, so right. Knowledge people, they like low maintenance relationships. They like to read and to think, and they move away from people to serve people. Whereas a compassion person moves toward people to serve people. Do you understand?
This is the beauty of, honestly, my marriage. Yeah. But my wife is behind the scenes, supporting like that, and I'm like, let's get everybody together.
Yeah. But see, here's the thing. We're not just one. We're a combination of four things. What it means is if knowledge just lasts, this is an area you need to work on. Because you're going to do one of two things. You're going to take flight or fight to try to manage that stress. But that's your partner, someone you love. So you have to learn this about yourself and bring up those skills, because the more knowledge you can be with her, the more compassionate she can be with you. We're not just one, we're a combination of things. So we have two influences on our life. We have an innate, unlearned influence, and that's called nature. And then we have the environmental. That's the learn. That's the part we learn from others, our parents and others. So the environment teaches us some things, and innately we are able to understand some things. That drives us. So first you have to understand yourself. Once you understand your human factor profile code, now you have to apply it to others. If you go into DMV and it's crowded, and that's a very long line, and one person is going step by step on every form, you have to say to yourself at this time, this is a structured situation. Mm-hmm. If you're structured, you understand. But if you're not structured, if you're compassionate, you see people frustrated, that bothers you. Your energy, you want things to move very fast, that bothers you. So you have to be able to adjust mentally and say to myself, this person is this way, therefore I have to change my processing of information about this person and make the change. Mm-hmm. But we live in the moment. Because we live in the moment, we're not able to make the transference and process the information, so we experience stress. But if you're able to say, I understand my wife needs this time alone, and if she's able to say, I see where Lain needs more compassion, he needs a touch, maybe he needs more conversation. You see? Oh, it's making the application as the process that's important.
Well, in the spirit of like the you go first concept is like, you're giving us this tool, and what I love about it is it's so simple. I know when my mom and dad went through it, my mom is clearly so compassion, my dad is knowledge and structure. So when she wants a hug, he's out, cleaning the garage and blowing off the yard to say he loves her. It's a little like the love languages, but it's so much more than that.
It is.
To say it's really an understanding language, to give us a perspective. I understand why their priority is here and mine is there. Who's going to go first to find the middle ground, or at least appreciate that that's how they go about,
Think about it. That's how you create the perfect world. First I understand, and then I apply it. Mm. And I apply it in such a way that you feel it. So when you're being compassionate to me and I'm compassionate, I feel it. So naturally, I can be knowledge or energy or structure with you because I'm more at ease. See, people only repeat behaviors that make them feel good about themselves. Mm-hmm. See, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If I feel good, I can act well and I can make you feel good. But so you have this question of esteeming behavior. We tend to move away from things that de-esteem us and move toward things that esteem us. But if you have a partner in life, you have a partner in business, you have a partner, or even if countries, leaders, experienced this and applied this, really applied it, we could create the perfect world. Yeah. We could create perfect worlds at home, perfect worlds in communities, in schools. Think about how we could eliminate the violence in schools right now. Mm-hmm. How if people cared. Some of the people who are reacting out of stress, de-esteeming situations, because they don't understand themselves and they don't understand other people care about them or how to reach them. So that's the difficulty, is applying these principles. But first you have to learn the principles.
Yeah. I've seen you when you're talking to young people before talk about what the type is that usually ends up with a school shooting and things like that. And I know you've impacted, like I said, the world from the Pentagon to, inner cities to these schools and these kids that are really trying to understand themselves and the people around them, and how sometimes these human factors, like you said, fight or flight takes over. And I know even in this conversation, like I'm feeling emotional, like my compassion is so off the charts, and they're like, intensity of this message that I want to get out to the world, because that perfect world between me and my wife, or me and my kids, comes from that understanding and the ability to apply it. And it's so beautiful the way you've put this human factor together. I just want more people to experience it. So who are the types that you think are most obvious, or like I said, who lashes out in the school environment? I can't remember which type and how you said that before.
Well, energy students, or people who are energy, tend to want to do things right now. And they think fast, and they're very decisive. But in a school, you have a very regulated, structured system where there's confinement, there are rules, and there's the flexibility is not there. So an energy person has to get up and exercise and move about in 20 minutes. They can't sit still very long. So school is very hostile to them. And what happens when you're hostile? You strike back, you strike out, you swear, you cuss, you fight. Those kinds of things happen, okay? But structured students do well in school because they love the structured environment.
Yeah.
Someone tells them what to do. There's a time limit when you're supposed to do it. Compassion kids seem to do well in school when there's a caring teacher, where there's a dialogue. A knowledge person can do without school because they can read on their own. They like to move at their own pace. They don't want anybody regulating them. So, but school is very hostile to an application learner who doesn't need all the time. They want to physically, they're skill centered, so they need to move toward that. Whereas, so naturally, they're the ones that kicked out of school for having problems.
Yeah.
And what do you do with an energy kid on the streets?
They join a gang or something.
Yes. But the gang members who tend to join gangs are compassion kids, because sometimes they feel left out or not included. So they tend to move toward people who would include them and care about them. And sometimes to prove your loyalty and to prove that you're a part of something where you're going to get love back, you engage in activities that's not so good. Sometimes you're going to have the teenage pregnancies, you're going to have the small robberies and things, and then you might lead to real serious gang activity. So gang members tend to be compassion kids who connect with energy because they're naturally kind of connected to each other, and they will take on activities of the other. In other words, to prove I love you and I'm going to get love back, I'll do this ugly thing. And you take knowledge kids. Now, what's beautiful about knowledge, the imagination is beautiful. The imagination, I mean, because we have imagination, we can go to the moon, we can watch, we can control the space shuttle with our watches.
Yeah.
You know, we have 120 megabytes on our pens, and our phones will have 500 megabytes of information. So that's a beautiful mind. But when that mind is disturbed, for example, the most heinous person on the planet is a knowledge-based person, because they tend to move away from people. So they don't feel the sense of caring, the sense of harm they do to people. So it's easy to wipe out everybody. I mean, to shoot everybody in the classroom because they were there.
Yeah.
And not have remorse, because these are people who love is a low priority for them in high-stress situations.
Wait, now you're a knowledge person, so it's interesting that you're saying that's the...
Well, what's the first thing a knowledge person do? They go silent and move away from people and only think about themselves. They tend to forget about other people because that's who they are. See, we can't help be who we are until we know about who we are. And then we can see when we're moving into these different environments. You go into a math classroom, you have to actually go into a knowledge state of mind because it's theoretical. You go into a history classroom, you have to move into a structured state of mind because there are dates and things.
Yeah.
You go into economics, same thing. But if you go into history or sociology or psychology, then you have to move into, a different state of mind.
Well,
having to understand that. And when you meet people, for example, you find a person who's tattooed up. That's a person who is chances are it's going to be an energy person because this person likes being noticed and getting everybody's attention. And they're fast paced. They have something to indicate, I'm sexual, I'm active, I'm fun loving. That's who they are.
Yeah.
Okay, you meet a person who is, who's organized. They're using their cell phone, or they have a list or something, or their own time. They don't like being held up. They can't stand being late for something. That person is structured. So what do you do in a structured person? You get structured.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it's interesting that like we're talking about schools and stuff, but the conversion to then companies and how and it's like you got to have a sales force out there.
Yeah.
And they're the energy people, right? They're like out in the
Absolutely.
they're in their car calling on all the doctors or seeing their customers and all that. You got the knowledge person that's in the lab, creating the new. You got the structured people that are, in accounts receivable and accounts payable.
Writing
and then
rules.
you've got your compassion person, maybe HR or the person that's, hey, we need to have a team building and get everybody together because we're feeling. And the beauty of these 4 zones and how, we talk about it at Odyssey about catching yourself being yourself.
Yeah.
And it's enough to, I caught myself in something and now I have this human factor to look to and then to see now my relationship with the other people and recognizing, they're a knowledge person, I'm an energy person. I see where I need to adapt some of the way I present or teach them or the way I interact with them in a meeting. That's why they don't want to sit in on a 3-hour, planning meeting for next quarter.
Sure.
They need short meetings with some interactive time. And,
Absolutely.
I started this with just, there's no way this is going to be enough time.
Yeah.
And I'm feeling that again. I want to have Robii round 2, Robii round 3. Sure. To continue to dive into this because this is, like you said, the key to a better world. Like, what was the term you used about a better world, or
how to create the
perfect world?
Yeah.
And I think I've heard legend that's going to be the title of your book that should come out sometime next year. Right. And I like the concept that this perfect world isn't necessarily it's the perfect world between us and how that impacts the people next to them and. Maybe in a classroom and then the school and then the neighborhood and then the town, and then the city and then like you said, world leaders, if they understood these things. I think there's a story about Ronald Reagan when he was talking to Gorbachev about taking down the wall and he got to a point where he said, let's take a walk. Yeah. And he recognized that this is a person that we need to change our physiology. This is a person that we've talked enough. Now let's move together as an action person.
Sure.
So I don't know how to even close up this because I feel like we're just starting. So what can you say to our listeners? Just give them something here.
We can do better. We can be taller, stronger, smarter, and more caring. We can. And I'd like to just speak to managers for a minute. You have a workforce, and we tend to, if you're going to change a home or a company or whatever the case may be, it has to start top down, bottoms up. And you have to recognize people are different. And if you're running a company or a team, try to make sure that each one of those primary innate core values are factored at the table. If you need a plan, guess who's going to give you the plan? A structured person, and step by step. Mm-hmm. You need it moved, you need it promoted, negotiated. That energy person's going to do that. You need to work out the bugs between people, create the problem solvers. That person needs to be compassionate. But if you need to look into the future, how you can develop this, you need the product knowledge to make it stronger. That person needs to be at the table and figure out how you can best use those people. Mm-hmm. You may be totally different. You may be primarily energy, want it all done right now. But if you have a team at the table talking about it, you can do it. It works for governments. It works for armies. It works for communities. It works for classrooms. Yeah. I mean, just understand people are different and then treat them differently. I'll close by saying, knowledge is power if you use it. But otherwise, it's just information if you don't. So as a result of that, in order to get the best out of others, you have to first understand yourself and then understand them and then act on it.
Yeah, well said, Robii. And you've invested so much of your life into gaining this information, to the impact you've had on people around the world. And it really and truly, I hope that you come back to the podcast and share more of your own personal story and how we can help impact relationships between parent and child, kids with each other, spousal relationships, significant relationships. I've had the luxury of, hearing your message with see my kids through these lenses. You're curious, are they left-handed or right-handed? And you should be just as curious as are they a knowledge, structure, compassion, or energy, and creating a world that converts and that you can reach that common ground. I know that, I have 3 kids and they're all very different, and I've seen them through the lens of the human factor that you've created, and I'm thankful to you for that.
I want to say something to you. From the moment I met you, that was significant. There was something significant about you. Lain, you speak people. You're a genius at bringing people together and bringing out the best in people. That's why we're doing this. Mm-hmm. You're not doing this for yourself. You're doing it for the universe because you can't help it.
Thank you.
I'm grateful that you allowed me to be a part of it. Thank you very much.
You're so welcome. And you're right. I just can't help it. And I can't help, but it really keeps me up at night figuring out how do we get this human factor to everybody, because I truly believe that it will be a perfect world if people understood what it is, the gift that you've given us through this human factor. So with that, and I'm thankful today that your grandson Zan is in the studio and your wife Anna's here, and so they'll fact check all these stories. And
Sure.
I know that as a knowledge person, you go deep and you really think deeply, but you have truly learned to bridge between a compassion person and find a way to support me, and I really appreciate it. So
whatever it takes for you, I'll do it.
No, I know. I caught you to get you here today, but I hope you come back. I really think this is a great platform to get your message out there to more people. So all of our listeners out there, I hope you're as thankful as I am that you got to hear some of the words of Robii Dotson, and that you will look for his book coming out next year, and that you'll come back to the podcast and maybe hear some more words of wisdom from him. So thank you so much, Robii, and you have truly helped us to go first. And I hope every listener out there will look around their life and look at those points of stress and those people who disrupt their sort of natural flow and think, hey, maybe they're just a knowledge person and I'm a compassion person, or maybe they're structure and I'm energy, and I can go first to have a deeper understanding of their values and why they operate the way they do.
All right.
So thank you so much. And thank you, Robii, for being here, everybody. Yeah.
Thank you. My pleasure.
I want to again thank Dr. Robii Dotson for joining us on You Go First and sharing his insights. You can find him on his website at globalednetwork.com, globalednetwork.com. He does not have an Instagram, but if you'd like to leave comments, you can do that at yougofirst.live in the comments section. Or if you're seeing this on the Odyssey team's Facebook, please leave a comment below and we'll forward those to Robii or get right back to you. Thanks, and make it a great day.
Thanks for listening to another episode of You Go First. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you want to listen to another episode, you can find us at yougofirst.live, or you can see more about our host, Lain Hensley, on his Instagram at OneDreamChaser. To learn more about his company, Odyssey Teams Inc., go to odysseyteams.com or follow all their social media channels at Odyssey Teams. Thanks again, and we hope that you will go first to share our podcast with a friend or colleague. Now, you go first.
Don't forget to like us on the button below. Follow us by clicking the bell. You'll get all future episodes, as well as you can certainly find the podcast on the audio version everywhere where podcasts are found. So we're looking forward to the next episode. We've got a lot of really exciting guests coming up. Thanks for watching.